Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Derek Lundsten, thank you so much for joining us today on People in Transition. We're so excited about listening to you.
Thank you for having me on, Bob. Looking forward to speaking with you and with your listeners.
Derek, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you, and I'm air quoting this, grew up?
It's a great question, and it's a funny answer. There were so many different jobs that I wanted to be as a young man or a young child. But the first one, actually, interestingly, was I wanted to be a garbage man. That was the very first job that I saw when I looked out my window every week and the garbage men came. I always saw them working hard, working together. They were actually having fun, cleaning up garbage. At the moment, there was no judgment on it for me. It was just, this is what these guys were doing, and I thought it was fun to ride in the back of a truck. They were just out there and seemed to be enjoying themselves. And I saw that look, and I remember that resonated with me. And then as I got older, I started exploring all sorts of different jobs that I wanted to be, from an astronaut to a lawyer to a doctor to a musician, all these different things. And ultimately ended up becoming an entrepreneur in the long run. But something has always stuck with me about those garbage men, in the sense that there was just a purity in what they were doing and being in the moment of where they were. When you look at what they were doing and the context of it, showing up with an enthusiasm and doing the dirty work, if you will, and a job that frankly isn't always appreciated by people. It's a lesson that I've learned and applied in my life and in my business and my career in a really meaningful way. And so I share that because it oddly has had an influence on me.
And Derek, what were the transition moments that occurred to get you from that picture of yourself as a young child to where you're at today?
Well, similarly, when I went to college, I wasn't actually sure that I wanted to go to college. At one point, I was talking with my parents about going to the military because I thought that would be an adventure. My parents felt it'd be better for me to go to school, and so I made a deal with them that if I were to get accepted to school, they would help me financially, and I would go to college. And so I did that, and I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I took some business courses early on. I really wasn't into those. I ended up studying philosophy and psychology because I found that content interesting at the time. And I started doing clinical research in the lab. And about halfway through college, I realized I didn't want to be a doctor, and I didn't want to become a psychologist, and I didn't want to become a lawyer, which is what a lot of people in philosophy end up doing. I did have interest in making some money, and I had a lot of friends who were business majors, and I felt I could do that. And so I went door to door with my resume at the time. This was pre-social media, to a bunch of companies in the area, and I got hired by a firm in consulting as an intern. And with much of what I did in my life, I applied myself fully, and I worked really hard and was effective, and I got hired right out of college to work for that organization. And through that experience, I have had lots of moments, transitional moments throughout my career, that ultimately led me to, moving into sales and sales leadership and general management, and then entrepreneurship and building different companies. So it's been a really fun, interesting journey. I can go into any other details you'd like on any aspects of that, but there's been many transitions along the way, very positive and even challenging ones along the way to where I am.
Yeah, it sounds like you have weathered, in fact, succeeded in going through the transitions. Derek, let's say that a friend just calls you up and tells you that unfortunately they have lost their job because their company has gone out of business because of this COVID crisis. What would you give them as the 2 or 3 pieces of advice as to steps they should take?
Sure. I can speak to that with some level of familiarity. I lost a job because at the time I was working with some partners to try to buy a company that I had been working with. And the deal didn't go as intended. And I found myself without a job as a result of that. And shortly thereafter, I decided to jump full into entrepreneurship. And the reason for me doing that was because I did a quick look at what was motivating that process to get to where I was, and the level of autonomy and the desire to create something meaningful and to work with people I wanted to work with. Those were all key drivers, and I felt it was the right time. It had been the push, if you will, to not to buy something, but to build something. For me, that was a key moment in my journey along the line of building businesses. But the reason why I share that story is because I had a lot of different emotions that I experienced when it happened, from a level of sadness to a level of anger to a real fire in my belly to go out and do something. And everybody has different responses to things that are unplanned or to challenges in their life. And I think the first thing I recommend is really take a moment to just acknowledge whatever that emotion or series of emotions that you're experiencing are. And then, kind of dig further into why do you have those emotions and what's fueling that, and where would you potentially like to reapply that energy, whatever that may be. And it'll be for different things for different people. Some people would say, I immediately want to go out and find a new role doing the exact same thing I was doing before. They want to go work for another company. Or they might say, I'm not finding the role that I thought I would find at a company because it's a really challenging economic time. And maybe there's a new career path or a new opportunity that they want to do. And even for the other pieces, what is it that you want to do? Oftentimes the answer is not clear at all. And the best thing to do is just to do something, right? For me, even in my own journey as an entrepreneur, it was just, I didn't know what the big picture was going to be. I still don't. But what I did know is I could feel something that was appealing to me to say, this is the direction I should go. This is the first action that you can take. And then once you do the first action, the second one becomes apparent. And once you do the second one, the third becomes apparent. And then you may have a series of choices on the next one. And that just kind of keeps building. And eventually, as with much of life, answers kind of just start to reveal themselves. And if you're doing that audit of what you need and what you want and what your emotions are telling you, you tend to start making decisions and taking steps towards the right things. And that's at least what I found in my own life.
Does that mean, Derek, that you think that if you were laid off or furloughed from your job, that you should take some time off before you start searching for that next opportunity?
Possibly. I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, some people, that's not a reality financially. They need, if they need to go provide for their families. I mean, I would say, look at that too, practically speaking. If you need to go earn a living, there's many ways to earn a living. There's lots of different ways to do that. So first off, look at your needs, your pure survival needs. And then if you have the luxury, I would say if you can take some moment and time to really evaluate what's important and what's going to make you happy in your career and your life, I think that's a great opportunity to do it. But it really does depend, Bob. I think, it's hard. And I think that's part of the big role for us as HR professionals and people who care about people, is you want to help people to live their happiest, healthiest, most fulfilled lives, and to help them ask questions of themselves and ask questions on what does align with their purpose or aligns with their skills, or what skills do they need to develop, or what do they need to go to explore, or what's there right for them. And that's part of what I've enjoyed so far with my work. I'm sure you do too.
I do. Yes, you're correct. Derek, what does you need to take charge of your career? If someone says that, what does that mean?
Well, I think it means two things. One, take responsibility for where you are or aren't, right? So wherever you think you should be or wherever it is that you are or want to be, take responsibility for yourself and the choices that you've made and will need to make to get there. And then it means look at the gap or the area between what it is that you want or what you think you want and where you are, and what do you think it will take to get there? What do you need to do? What do you need to accomplish? What do you need to know? What do you need to work on? what training or education would apply, what skills or successes will help you get further along. And I think it just means being really honest with oneself and saying, this is what I want, this is what I think I want, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what I think I need, and really just doing that analysis and then taking action, again, aligned with moving towards that. Because again, with goals, oftentimes once you meet a goal or objective, you find that there's another one or something else on the way. It's always an ongoing path, right? And I think that taking charge means that you are taking responsibility and then being accountable to the discipline that is required to fulfill on that responsibility.
Derek, I'm doing air quotes here again. Not being employed, being in transition, being in between jobs or opportunities is not a place of shame. You are more than a job. What does that statement mean to you?
I think you're tapping into work is one facet of our lives. And, we don't start off as young children working. We don't even start off as young children doing. We start off as human beings, right? And so the general idea is that when you're a child, you're unmolded potential, right? So when it's kind of the same thing like you were saying before, or when your question was, if you're in between jobs, that's just a temporary situation in someone's path in their journey. It's not permanent. It's just one moment. And that could be a day, it could be a week, could be a month, could be a year, it could be several years. It's really up in many ways up to whatever time frame someone wants to sit in that. And then whatever choices they make after, because there's lots of different things you can do. It may not match up with where you want to be or what you want to make financially or different things, but you can always do something, or you can do nothing. And that's fine too. I think it goes back to your work doesn't define you one way or another. And, that goes back to, I've only known this through reading it, but people talk about when they're on their deathbed and they think about their lives, very few people wish they worked more. Most people wish they spent more time with their families, or they wish they did more that would make them happy, or they wish they made decisions that were aligned with what they really wanted and not expectations of others, right? So I think that all goes back to your question. And I wouldn't necessarily even call it advice, but considerations that I've made to people and made for myself in times of transition.
Does going down the entrepreneur transition path, is that different somehow than someone who goes down I'm going to find the next corporate job or regular traditional job? Is it different somehow?
Yes and no. One is to be successful as an entrepreneur, in my opinion, you need to really know what you're signing up for. You're going into the unknown, right? It's both exciting and very uncertain and challenges you. Personally, for me, it's been the best thing ever because it's allowed me to discover parts of me and refine parts of me and do different things that were out there. But everybody's journey is different. Some people are best suited to be in a company or an organization. So it goes back to that question of what's your purpose or what's going to fulfill oneself, or how do you move closer to that? And I think people define it differently, and that changes over time too. At least what I'm seeing that, as our roles outside of work change, our priorities are different, right? And so, what drove me in my earlier stage of entrepreneur is different than what's driving me now, and all that kind of moves around. So I guess the answer, it's not anything wise, but it depends. It really depends on each person, and goes back to that question and really evaluating what's important, why is it important, how do I make it a reality, whatever that is, and what am I willing to do to make it a reality, and what am I willing to not do? And someone has to really evaluate that for themselves and keep auditing that. Entrepreneurship's not easy. That's all I would say about it.
What does taking care of your personal brand mean? And let's say that your personal brand is neutral to negative. How do you enhance it?
Well, I don't think in the format necessarily of personal brand. I think about back to that thinking forward, what would I want people to say if I were not here? So if I were dead, right? And just to be kind of direct about it, what would people say about my life? And do my actions every day with people align with what I would hope people would consider about me at that point in my life or beyond my life? And I think that goes back to core values and core behaviors that guide people. And I think if you do the right things and you take actions that align with those core values and those behaviors and consistently try to improve every day, and we all make mistakes, right? We all have things that would jeopardize that or things that are not always in alignment. That's part of the process. But owning those mistakes and taking responsibility, try to improve on them, try and not repeating them, making adjustments as you go. That's how all part of it. But I think if you do those things, then to come back around, your personal brand takes care of itself. Then it goes back to actually promoting that or getting the word out, if that's something that's important to someone, that they're willing to show that who they are and who they're perceived to be are the same. I think that's the most important thing. I think that's about integrity.
Derek, you've seen lots of resumes in your career. You've developed your own on a number of occasions.
Sure.
How do you get your resume to stand out in that stack of resumes? I think I read a statistic that there are oftentimes hundreds of resumes for one position. How do you get it to stand out?
Well, it goes back to my story. So and there's two parts to this question, answer this question. So one is resumes are increasingly becoming less of a thing in reality, in my opinion. Where now that we're living in the world of social media, everything's on LinkedIn or other tools. Resumes are becoming less of a practicality, and now and they're changing format. You have videos and video interviews and video resumes. So there's different ways to do that. I think that's partly because people were always looking for ways to stand out in a resume. You really can't, in my opinion, get to know a person on a deep level from what it says about them on a piece of paper. However, if I was to go back in time and say, this is what you want to do, how can you try to make yourself appealing that they want to give you the chance to get to know you? It's an invitation. A resume, in my opinion, is an invitation to say, would you like to get to know me? And is there enough information here that piques someone's interest, say there's value here, and this person is able to put their story together or their skills together in a way that catches that interest. Very much the same thing you do in marketing or in sales and different things like that. And so it comes back to relationships, in my opinion, in the long run, which is how do you gain access to people and get people's interest? And then after that, how do you sustain it? How do you deliver on it? I think we're moving in a world where who you are, what you contribute, how you share that with people starts to, the word spreads. And I think that education, and this is a whole other conversation we could have, but the educational system relative to where we are in employment and how we prepare people for education and the educational system and employment is about to go through a major shift. And I'm excited for what's going to come from that.
Derek, you talk about relationships being important. I keep hearing that networking is an important part of the success of my transition, but I don't know how to do it. And I don't think I'm as comfortable doing it based on what I do know about it. What should I do on that?
Well, the idea of networking, again, goes back to getting to know someone. Right? How do you get to know someone? I mean, I'll ask the question to you, Bob. What's important to you? Right? That's just a very open-ended question. You can answer that or not, but ultimately, by understanding what's important to someone, you connect with them. You find an area of interest or curiosity. You find an area of common grounds and common values. You find a way that you can potentially contribute and make someone's life more purposeful, more meaningful, better, richer, whatever it is, whatever adjective you want to use. That's what networking is. And then consistently doing that over and over and over again with no real expectation or anything in return, no real agenda other than trying to make someone's life better because you want to help them while they're here. That's what networking is. That's what relationships is. That's what trust is, in my experience. And when you do that over time, when you do that for enough people over time, you help people and they help you, and you learn about yourself, you learn about other people, and you develop skills.
So let's say you've got your resume and it made it through the review, and now you're going to do that first interview.
Yeah.
In today's environment, it could be a Zoom interview, telephone interview. Maybe it is an in-person interview. How should you prepare best for that to put your best foot forward?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is do some research on the organization and understand what's important in that organization. What's the vision of that organization? Where do they want to go? And then understand what the role that you're potentially interviewing is. How does that role support that bigger vision or that purpose that they're trying to do? And how does one's skills align with the work that's happening there? Those are things that I think are important for someone to understand going into an interview. And then I think it's the real small things, just that it sounds simple, but looking professional, dressing appropriately, and that's doing some research in the company again will help you understand what the right dress code is. But even in the Zoom, just really come prepared, look professional, have a smile, have a good attitude, seek to understand what's important to the employer and to help them understand why the skills, experience that someone brings are going to be additive to the process. And again, help and connect on a personal level with that individual that's doing the interview and help them understand how they can imagine seeing you as part of their team and how you can imagine yourself being part of that team and what that combination of skills and attitudes and energies looks like over time. And I think if people do that, they will find the right employers and the right people. And I think more and more productivity will happen and more roles and jobs will become available and more companies will get created.
Derek, you talked about finding out how my skills fit into the position that they have and how that position then fits into how the company makes money, basically. What's the best way that I can find what my own personal strengths and weaknesses might be?
Well, there's so many different tools out there now in terms of different analytical tools to look at your mindset, to look at your personality profile, to evaluate, different things that you're doing. There's so many different ways that one can now do that. And so I think that, just going to those different tools, then accessing different online and educational courses and training to help refine those skills or to boost those skills are all part of it too. And I think that's another part of where the educational model is going is as they'll start to be different data objects to even support people's skills and references that can happen. So there's more and more information that will support people's developed skills and how that transfers between different companies.
Derek, how do you answer that killer question? Tell me what your weaknesses are.
That's a really good one. Everybody has weaknesses. I think the person is owning that. I mean, I can tell you, for me, I don't love to do analytical work in terms of different aspects of that. So that's probably not going to be the right role for me. But I can say that owning that they have something that they want to improve on, but then focusing on their strengths and what they can bring, I think is really important. Obviously, we need to work on our weaknesses. Even though I don't necessarily like it, I continue to work on doing work that's analytical and operational in nature because it's going to help me to be a better leader and a better manager. And I think that's as long as someone shows up with the desire and willingness to keep improving, while at the same time highlighting their strengths and their ability to contribute, I think that moves in the right direction.
What if you had something bad in your past work history, discipline, maybe even got fired?
Yep.
How do you handle that with a potential new employer?
I think it goes back to being upfront about it generally. Be candid about the things that happened and give some perspective on why you believe they happened and what lessons you learned from them, assuming you have learned those lessons. Obviously, I think most people, if they've learned lessons, they can speak to something quote unquote bad as how it's going to actually be a value to both the employee and the employer. I think when it's truly bad is when people either haven't learned a lesson or are unable to even acknowledge something that happened. That's a bigger red flag.
Going through a job transition can be challenging at best, but deciding that you need to make a major career pivot, say to a completely different industry, can be even more difficult for some. What would be your 3 or 4 things that you would recommend to that person who is actually taking a complete career pivot, as you did in going into entrepreneurship, to help make that type of shift easier?
Well, to sort of repeat, I think one is really understand the motivation for why you want to or why you think you want to make a big shift. And oftentimes for people that are doing that, my experience that people go through oftentimes years of questioning, is this the right role for me? Is this the right company for me? Should I be doing something else? What should I be doing? I think I want to do this. And so there's usually a whole process around it. If you are really listening to that and really exploring that, having that dialogue around what's the motivator and what do you hope will happen as a result of that shift, and then doing some introspective work on, is that truly going to satisfy that urge or that need or that motivation that you have, then I think that's something that's good to do. So I think one, really take the time to dig in and understand yourself and your motivations, and then understand and evaluate where it is you think you want to go and how you get there. That goes back to what I'd said earlier. And then once you've decided, go all in on it. Just really commit fully and don't question your decision. But once you're in, you're in. And I think that was one of the benefits of, for me personally, I've been looking at this entrepreneurship path for a decade of my life prior, and thinking maybe I should go start a business, or not sure what I would do. And I was like, well, we'll try to acquire this company, and then I can kind of step into an already established company and be an owner. And when all this happened, I just said, well, I guess the training wheels are off. Time to decide. Am I going to go do this or am I not going to do this? And for me, it was a hard yes to go do it.
Derek, how does time management impact your transitions and what you're able to get accomplished during that time?
Well, so for me, time management is something that I've consistently worked on, and I've gotten really quite good at it. And I was not necessarily good at it early on in my career. So back to a weakness. I'm a time fanatic. I mean, I live by my calendar. If you look at it, every minute of my day almost is planned out, and it includes everything from family time to work time to different elements. I am a I'm a fanatic for trying to get more efficient, more productive with my time. So I think how you use your time and how you channel that energy effectively in those time windows is really a key separator for people. And that's not like a direct answer to your question how it works for transitions, but I think how people use their time is critically important. And I do think that it's a distinct differentiator for people, and especially in a transition.
Kind of another layer, if you will, that impacts transitions is your health and well-being.
Yes.
What do you suggest in terms of that? Someone going through transition and dealing with their own health and well-being?
Well, I think, again, back to what I do now, and another driver of my career is health and well-being. And I think that being physically healthy in terms of getting good sleep and eating well and exercising and managing your emotions and managing your stress and doing a holistic well-being evaluation is really, really key. And I think that, if you take care of your physical self and your emotional self and your spiritual self, and you work on developing and educating and growing as a person, you're in a better position to be successful in whatever area of your life, whatever transition you may go through. So for me, that's one of the top priorities is being healthy. I mean, there's the old adage that a healthy person has a million wishes or a million dreams. An unhealthy person only has one. And I think that's very, very true.
What keeps you grounded, Derek? What keeps you centered?
Well, one, I've done a lot of work personally to be grounded and to be centered and to be balanced. I've done a lot of introspection. I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of personal development and growth, and both professionally and through coaching. Now, today, what keeps me grounded is my family, my sense of my relationship with God and the higher purpose of the universe. It sounds kind of corny, but it's true. And how I show up in a way that is able to contribute in my work and in my community at a high level, and trying to be integrated in all those different aspects. For me, the word balance has never really resonated, but the word integration for me is really, really strong. And integration and alignment kind of feel like they're two aspects of that. And it's almost like when I think about DNA, and it's integrated, right? So how do you bring all those different elements together? And it kind of winds and moves, and it's dynamic. But the way I think about it is really connecting to higher purpose, and also just trying to be present in the now, and never getting too high, never getting too low, never being too attached to anything, and always being willing and adaptable to learn.
Derek, do you think that transition management is different today than it was 10 or 15 years ago?
I do. I think that over the last 30 years in particular, transitions have really become a thing. I think in the last 15 years, when I think back to growing up in the 80s, and there was that time when layoffs were really becoming a thing, because before that, people would go work for the same company for 30, 40, 50 years, and you're retired with that company. In the 80s is really when things started, where you started to see layoffs and reorganizations and a real shift, in my opinion, of how capitalism was working. And you saw more and more people going through these transitions later on in their lives. I think in the last 15 years, people have started to adapt. Some of the lessons that were learned, some of the new businesses that happened, and also then, in the last 15 years, the rise of the internet and the rise of connectivity, people have access to so much more information, so much more networks, so much more ability to learn from each other. I mean, that's ultimately what I'm doing now in my business with LifeGuides. The ability to use the network of people, the crowd of people to share experiences, to access experiences, and to do it, more healthily, more effectively, better. I think that people have developed, there's strategies and tactics, and also there's a lot more tools and resources available to help people through transitions.
You mentioned LifeGuides. Any other books or other resources that you would recommend to someone going through a transition?
I think there's that book, What Colors My Parachute. I remember reading that early on. It was all about, trying to find the right career for you. I think that's a good kind of practical planning book. I like to read stories about people, like as well, like understanding people's stories and journeys, biographies of where their own lives were. You learn a lot about that. And that goes back to this concept of shared experience and empathy and learning. I think that's a big driver. So those are a couple of different ways I would recommend.
Derek, if our listeners remember only 3 things from our episode today, as they go through their own personal transition, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
1, be patient with yourself wherever you are. Be always willing to adapt and grow and learn, and recognize that everything in many ways is temporary. And to be willing to live in those moments, or sit in those moments of discomfort for the benefit of one's growth. And I think that if you do those 3 things, transitions seem to be easier, and you tend to get the answers and the right people to show up to help you along your way.
Derek, I know that I can speak for our listeners that this was a really value-packed episode. You gave them some real life experiences. You showed your own personal vulnerability in the transitions that you've had to go through, and you shined a light on that there is a tomorrow. From all of our listeners, Derek, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.